Dear friends, as the Russian assault stagnates in Ukraine, Russian leader Vladimir Putin announced partial military mobilization, putting the country's economy and people on a wartime footing. Today, I'm going to host a Berlin-based expert who has vast knowledge and expertise on Russia and Ukraine, and who has been actively commenting the developments in Eastern Europe, Mr. Sergej Sumlenny, who also served as the Heinrich Böll Foundation country director for Ukraine and Belarus in the past. Mr. Sumlenny, I am greeting you, and I express my gratitude for your time for this interview, and hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation today.
Thank you for having invited me today. Thank you.
Let us start from the most recent development in the Ukraine war, the partial mobilization decision and Putin's televised address to the nation, in which he said the West wants to destroy our country and claimed the West had tried to turn Ukraine's people into cannon fodder. What do the mobilization decision and Putin's statements tell you? Are you ready for discourse analysis?
Well, first of all, we need to say that Vladimir Putin is obviously the hostage of his own faults, his own mistakes. It is clear that he's losing the war in Ukraine against Ukraine. It is clear since a couple of months. The latest Ukrainian counteroffensive proves it very clear. Russia has no chance to win war in Ukraine, at least conventional war. And the moment for general mobilization is already gone as well. Like we expected that if then Putin should have proclaimed general mobilization in May this year, after he has lost the battle for Kiev and Chernihiv. But now, like having already burned his officers and his army in Ukraine, he has no structures to adopt to use all these conscripts. Like let me put it clear, like you cannot, like 300,000 recruits which Shoigu has proclaimed Russia is ready to mobilize do not make an army. Like 300,000 people are just a bunch of people. They do nothing without proper organization,
no training, no skills, right?
Without training, without structure, without equipment, without weapons, without knowing each other, without being trained to fulfill the orders, and without the proper command. During the Soviet time, the mobilization foresaw that there are incomplete divisions, so-called cadred divisions, or in Russian kadrирование, which Soviet military ironically called castrated divisions, because they consisted only out of some hundreds of officers who were waiting for the recruits in the case of war. So now, logically, all these people, even if they have some sort of military education before, but we don't know like how strong this education were, how's good, they need to be integrated into existing structures, and Russia simply doesn't have them. So I'm afraid that, or I hope that these announcements were a pure public relation affair for Vladimir Putin. He clearly wants to demonstrate the West that he has allegedly unlimited resources in manpower, and therefore he cannot be defeated. So his message to the West is stop feeding Ukraine with weapons. We will win anyway because we have that much people. And for his own people, for his own citizens, the message is don't be afraid. There will be no general mobilization. It's only a limited one. We will only conscript those who have their military experience, so your sons and husbands will not be affected. Both messages are lie. Of course, he cannot have all these 300,000 people integrated into the army out of the reasons I mentioned before. And of course, in a case of mobilization, I think there will be one, like there is already one ongoing. Also, the people without any military experience or without relevant military experience will be conscripted or mobilized, exactly as Putin promised earlier this year that only the professional soldiers, the contracted soldiers, will be sent to Ukraine. And of course, he lied because there were thousands and tens of thousands of conscripts who have been sent to Ukraine and died there or been taken as prisoners. There are proofs for that. So both messages are pure public relation, and both messages are lie.
Mr. Sumlenny, you just said for the outside audience, Putin's message was designed to convey the idea that the Russian side enjoys the unlimited resources. But some experts claim it's obvious that the Russians are running out of human resources and munitions. Approaching is the colder season, including Rasputitsa, which means slower advancement for the Russians. At the same time, we have to underline that the wintertime will be quite extraordinary a test for the Europeans who have to survive the skyrocketing energy bills. How do you see these next few months until the spring, both on the ground and at the geopolitical level?
Well, for Vladimir Putin, of course, like his resources are very limited. He already tried to conscript everyone he could get. Like he tried to conscript the inmates from the prisons who are in the worst physical and moral shape. He tried to conscript homeless people. Now in Moscow, there are officers, army officers running, trying to conscript migrants, working migrants from Central Asian countries, from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and other countries which belong to the most discriminated people in Moscow, who literally have no rights in Moscow. And the only way why they want to conscript them, because they are afraid of conscripting Moscovites. Because if you conscript Moscovites, the most privileged group in Russia, some civil unrest can be unfold. So technically, Russia tries to get every single male who can be sent to the front without the risk that his relatives will protest, like the inmates, homeless people, and working migrants. That means that the resources of Vladimir Putin are already exhausted. Like, look, he started this war with 150,000 of soldiers gathered around Ukraine, and official Ukrainian information says that Ukrainians have killed about 55,000 of Russian soldiers. Some dozens of thousands have been wounded in action, of course. Now Putin says that he needs another 300,000. So my question is, what happened to the first 150,000? Maybe Ukrainian numbers are not overestimation of the Ukrainian success. Maybe it's underestimation, who knows? So he's clearly running out of resources. We know that Russian army is under-equipped. They don't have proper equipment. They don't have proper weapons. The only thing they have a lot are the ammunition, but still they need to rely now on the equipment, the drones bought in Iran and ammunition bought in North Korea. Just think about it, just taste this information. The mighty Russia, the member of United Nations Security Council, the nuclear superpower, asks North Korea to sell some ammunition for its artillery, and needs drones of Iranian manufacture to hit Ukrainian armies. So normally it should have been vice versa. But no, it is Russia which fights with weapons from Iran and from North Korea. So Russia is completely humiliated. They don't know what to do. They have all the tools in their toolbox, which they believe they will use after the 3 days war for the victory, like the referendum, a fake referendum in the occupied territories, or like some proclamation of defending of Russian people. They don't even control the Zaporizhia region or Kherson region, but they want to stage the referendum there. It is clear acknowledge of their defeat. The second question is what happens in Europe with the energy bills. First, you need to say that the German energy policy of 16 years of Angela Merkel and previous of Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, it was a total disaster which led Germany into a nightmare dependency from the Russian gas. Like the previous German chancellors, like Willy Brandt or like Helmut Schmidt, they used to say that Germany may not depend on more than 20% of its gas supply from one supplier. Now, like Germany had last year up to 40% of Russian gas supply, and the German reservoirs for gas were sold to Russian companies, and they have not been filled by Russian gas. So now the situation is much better than it was like 2 weeks or 2 months before. We have about 90% of our gas reservoirs full with gas. That is enough to supply our economy for a pretty longer time. We also have the new routes for supplying of energy like gas, coal, oil from the other regions. Of course, for the German economy, this winter will be hard, and of course, the apartments will be not as good heated as they used to be. The worst problem will be for economy which uses natural gas as the resource, not as an energy resource, but as a resource for chemical production. But all these challenges are not that dramatic that Germany will collapse. Even now, with skyrocketing prices for energy, 2/3 of German population stays clear for further support of Ukraine. So effectively, what Vladimir Putin has done with his de facto embargo on selling gas to Europe, he has accelerated the process of understanding in Germany and in the EU that Russian gas is a toxic asset. It has accelerated the process of rerouting our energy supply. And I think it is also one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin is so desperate now, because what he believed should be an ultimate weapon, he believed that the streets of European cities will be filled by this autumn by raging riots who just burn the shops and attack the government authorities. It didn't happen. He is losing his war against Ukraine. He's losing his gas war against Germany and against the EU. He is facing the lack of understanding within his own population. Like, look what happened with the prices for flight tickets the day he announced this part of mobilization. Flight ticket from Moscow to Dubai, the last thing I saw cost $17,000 US. And the most popular inquiry on Google in Russia is how to leave Russia. So he's clearly losing his war. He's trying to pretend he's still the strong man. He's trying to threat the world with the nukes. But we know that for him, the nukes have always been the tool of blackmailing. And he knows it well, too, that the moment he ignites one nuke or two nukes, this leverage will be lost, because this threat will cost nothing after the threat has been fulfilled. So he has nowhere to run. He can survive for like a couple of months or a couple of years. It depends, but most probably he will lose this war and his country and his position.
Well, I was about to ask about Putin's fate, because you, a couple of minutes ago, you just said the Russians were humiliated in the recent Ukrainian counteroffensive. And according to some rumors, the relations between Putin and some of his generals are strained as Putin canceled his meetings with generals after another defeat. Probably we can again speculate that this dissatisfaction amongst the Russian society can also grow because of this partial mobilization announcement. And you just said that the Russians are already Googling how to leave Russia. So do you see any dynamic, or at least a hint about possible power change of domestic origin in Russia? If yes, what would that mean for Russia, Ukraine, and the rest of the world? If not, what do you think will happen of Russia, and what risks may arise?
Well, first, I don't think that Russian generals can be a threat to Putin. Russian generals are the same as they have been during the Soviet time. Like the Soviet Union, after the Stalin purge on the army in 1937, the Soviet army was an organization under very strict supervision of the party and KGB. And the goal of the Soviet government was to groom the new type of the officers who have very low level of education, who are very dependent, who are mostly not very intelligent, and who are so terrorized by the idea they can face some sort of repression, that they do nothing which could be seen as a political activity. There have been like some very, like if you compare a Soviet officer in 1980s and the US American officer from West Point, you will see on the American side a typical academic, like the sort of a former student of Yale or Harvard, and on the Soviet side you will see like an alcoholized lumpen who can barely read and write. So it was clear like the policy of the Soviet Union to eliminate any political threat from the party. So now what we can see in the army is practically the same. There were some attempts of the Russian generals, already Russian ones under Boris Yeltsin, to form some sort of political opposition. Some of the generals died under strange circumstances like Lev Rokhlin. And I don't see any way for Russian generals to form some serious opposition to Vladimir Putin. I also don't believe that Vladimir Putin's closest circle, like his KGB or FSB friends, like Sergei Ivanov or Patrushev or others, or even like his favorite Zolotov or Shoigu, that they can form some sort of opposition, because they are way too dependent on Vladimir Putin, and they cannot just abandon him saying we didn't know or we couldn't oppose. So their fate is too closely tied. Yeah, very closely tied with Vladimir Putin's one. What can be a real opposition, I think the same as we have witnessed during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like during the collapse of the Soviet Union, the moving part of the collapse were the elites of Soviet republics, who were also the members of Politburo. Like if you think about Gaidar Aliyev or Shevardnadze, or those who signed the Belovezhska Treaty, the heads of Belarusian and Ukrainian socialist republics, they were the moving power behind this collapse. And also the Komsomol, the youth organization of the party, which managed to present themselves as the apolitical, young, modernistic opposition. So you see this pattern. The representatives of ethnic regions or ethnic republics, and those who say, okay, we are too young to decide anything, we have not done anything bad, so we can be the new business elites. I think currently it will be the same. I think that currently, like some leaders of Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Sakha-Yakutia, or you name them, like I don't think, for example, that Tuva could be, or Adygea, or other regions could be within the first ones, because they are too poor and they don't have enough population. But those like Tatarstan or Bashkortostan can be the forerunners, as well as such regions who don't have that strong ethnic component, like Karelia, for example, but who can appeal to their partly mythological but still existing connection to Europe. Like Karelia can say anytime, well, we were the part of Finland, Stalin has conquered us during the Winter War. Or, for example, the Arkhangelsk region or Murmansk region can say, well, we're not Russians, we are Pomors. Like we are those who traded with the Norway during the 18th century or 19th century. We have been Russified. It doesn't mean that it should be completely true. We know that for the creation of the nation, sometime the mythology is very important, the mythology in a good way. Like the idea of why these people create a new entity. And I think that the important turning point will be when one region will feel itself safe from the Moscow's terror, when they will see that Moscow doesn't have power to send its terror troops to this region to bring it to order, and they can defect, so to say, like to proclaim independency, and they will see that the leaders, first of all, of this region, because the grassroots development in Russia, I don't believe in it, frankly speaking, but the elites should see that the independency will bring them more benefits than risks. And this will be the moment when Russia will collapse, exactly as the Soviet Union has. Like, if you think about the collapse of Soviet Union, like early 1991, there was a referendum where most people, also in Ukraine, voted for preserving the Soviet Union. Of course, like the formula of the referendum was very weird, and actually, like, it was designed with the purpose that people vote yes. But still, the majority voted to preserve the Soviet Union. And then in August, the attempt of coup d'etat has happened. And the communists in Moscow have demonstrated that they have no resources, that they're just a bunch of very old, angry, but also feared people without any real power. And in autumn this year, just 6 months after the first referendum, there was the next wave of referendums. And it was quite another situation. Almost everyone voted for leaving the Soviet Union. In Ukraine, for example, even the mostly Russia inhabited, because Russia sent their people to this region to create the over-representation of Russians there. Even these regions like Crimea or eastern parts of Ukraine, they all voted majority for leaving the Soviet Union. Just think about it. So I think the same will happen with Russia. No one will expect exactly when it will happen, but when the cracks will reach the certain level of no return point, the empire will just crack and will disappear. And Vladimir Putin will, of course, because he will be the president of Russian Federation without Russian Federation, even if he will be alive.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us. I would like to speculate a little bit more, if you don't mind. What do you think Putin or whoever will be in power will do next? Will they go all in and risk a global war of destruction, or the protracted conflict of medium intensity is a realistic option? For instance, a colleague of mine from the office is predicting the cessation of hostilities by spring. So how do you see how long this conflict is going to continue?
Well, first, I need to say that even if they try to go all in and to attack the West in a global war, they will have no chance. We have seen that like 20 HIMARS delivered to Ukraine have decimated Russian army. And like some hundreds of HARM anti-radiation missiles have done the same with Russian anti-air defense. So then think what will happen when Russian army will face the NATO, even the NATO in Europe, like with hundreds of modern battle tanks, with a lot of aviation, with all the missile power. I don't think that Russian army will be able to stand a week against this army. It will just be wiped out. So the question is, effectively, if Russia will dare to hit Ukraine or some Western countries with 1 or 2 or 3 nukes, because this will be the only thing they will be able to do before they will be wiped out. So my answer is this risk cannot be excluded. Not because Vladimir Putin is a maniac. He is clearly a person who can kill a lot of people and who has like no moral restrictions on doing this. But when he decides to launch nukes, he will do it, of course, but only with a cold calculation. He never makes the steps which are weird. Like, they can be morally crazy, but they are never weird in the sense of logic. So if he goes some steps, he goes them because he believes that these steps will bring him more profit than losses. He may make a mistake, like he was done with Ukraine, believing that he can crush Ukraine within 3 weeks or within 3 days. But this was not. This attack was not because he's crazy. No, he was clever enough to understand that it brings him profit. He just made wrong estimation of the strength of Ukrainians. So until now, Vladimir Putin's nuclear rhetoric was the rhetoric of blackmailing. And as any blackmailer, he knows that the appearance of the threat and the existence of the threat is the only tool which works until this threat is not fulfilled. Like, I cannot threat you with something I have already used. I cannot threat you with the disclosure of some information if I have already disclosed this information, because the harm is done. I cannot threat you with a nuke and with the terror of nuclear war when I have already launched nukes, because the terror is already happened. Like, it will not go worse. At the same time, I don't believe that Vladimir Putin's nuclear threat can be strategic and global, because in this case, he will lose. That will be his suicidal step. So the only way for him to use nukes is like to explicitly and demonstratively hit some targets with not on the NATO territorium, but for example, some cities in Ukraine with tactical nukes. All Ukrainians I talked to about this danger said to me, okay, let me try, because it is terrible, of course, and we don't want it to see. But he has already destroyed our cities like Mariupol, Sumy, or parts of Kharkiv with the destruction, which is the destruction equal to usage of Hiroshima scale nukes. So this will not be worse than we are already experiencing, they told me. Quite the opposite. This will exclude Russia from any circle of normal nations, of reasonable nations, and this will force the West to punish Russia finally and totally. So I don't think that Vladimir Putin will ever use nukes because of these reasons, because he loves to blackmail us with the nukes, because he knows this will not bring him any profit. And frankly speaking, I would be afraid to launch nukes out of the simple fear they have never been tested. We know that Russian planes tend to fall down, Russian tanks tend to not run, Russian missiles, entire air missiles, tend to fall down on the Russian very territory, exactly as the Russian ballistic missiles like Kinzhal or Iskander. Many of them fall down on Russian territory. So now think that they launch nukes, and the nukes, which they have, I repeat, never tested, produced in Soviet era,
detonate,
they detonate.
Yeah. I see. Interesting. Mr. Sumlenny, what can we understand from Putin's most recent visit to Samarkand and meetings with major non-European leaders within the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Does he look isolated?
I think he looks worse than isolated. He looks being laughed at. And that is the worst. Like, do you remember this marvelous situation from the Harry Potter movie, when the cadets of the Hogwarts school, they need to eliminate some terror, and then they discover the spell of ridiculous, and the spell of ridiculous is to make something look funny. You cannot be afraid of something you find funny. So Vladimir Putin, who is currently the person who needs to wait for any president and every president he meets, like in Turkey, in Kyrgyzstan, in other countries, and he's trying to talk to press, and he clearly cannot find his own ways to present himself to the media. He looks to be humiliated and to be laughed at. The world of politics, especially the politics where China and Turkey dominate, like two incredible cruel players in the world politics, is very tough. And Vladimir Putin is exactly the leader who is some sort of a walking bag of money in the sense of his heritage. Everyone sees Russian army doesn't exist anymore. Russian army was a fake, a total fake. Russian weapons is a fake. Russian strength is a fake. Russian influence is a fake. The president of Kazakhstan talks to his counterparts demonstratively using not the Russian language he used before, but speaking Kazakh. The leaders of other countries ignore Vladimir Putin. They try to forge their own deals. China and Turkey are already sharing the post-Soviet Russian influence sphere. And they're doing this in front of the eyes of Vladimir Putin, as if he is already dead and Russian Federation is not existing anymore. So I think he is currently he reminds like a former lion or wolf, or you call him whoever, who is already dying, and everyone around knows it, and there is no way to avoid it. And the leaders of other countries, they are currently rethinking their politics. You see how many conflicts started to ignite currently in the area which former Russia tried to control. This is exactly because people see there is no Russia anymore who can intervene. And I don't think that the collapse of Russia will bring us more wars. I don't think this is something which will explode. I think that what we observe now is just the first understanding of the people that they may try to test something, but all these conflicts will come down very soon, because also the new powers will fill this vacuum. There is no vacuum in international relations. Like our European problem is in Europe, very few people understand that Russia will collapse. Very few people believe Russia can collapse because they think Russia is eternal. Russia is not. So when Russia will collapse, I'm afraid the European influence in the region will be very limited, and we will have to deal with the powers which already understand that Russia will disappear, like Turkey, China, maybe some other countries. Maybe Kazakhstan will be more or less independent player, like dealing somehow with China, but trying to set its own alliances. We will see it, but unfortunately, not that much European influence in the region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sumlenny. These were the questions from my side, and I did not dare to interrupt you because I was enjoying every second of this informative session. Thank you a lot for your detailed analysis, and I am already looking forward to another conversation with you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you can have it like as an interesting interview. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a huge pleasure and huge honor for me. Thank you.